Before women were given their rights, their main priority was to stay home, do chores, and look after the kids. The origins of women's rights are often associated with Europe, which started a snowball effect of women getting their rights, beginning with New Zealand and hopefully ending with the entire world. Emmeline Pankhurst was born in England in 1858. In 1903, she founded the Women's Social and Political Union, which used militant tactics to agitate for women's suffrage. After studying in Paris, Golden returned to Manchester, where she met Dr. Richard Pankhurst in 1878. Richard was a lawyer who supported a number of radical causes, including women's suffrage. Over the next few years, Pankhurst would encourage WSPU members to rein in their demonstrations when it seemed possible that a bill on women's suffrage might move forward. By 1913, militant actions by WSPU members included window breaking, vandalizing public art, and arson. Throughout these protests, suffragettes were arrested, but in 1909 the women had begun to engage in hunger strikes while in prison. Feeling that suffragettes needed to make sure that they had a country to vote in, Pankhurst decided to call for a halt to the militancy and demonstrations. The government released all WSPU prisoners, and Pankhurst encouraged women to join the war effort and fill factory jobs so that men could fight on the front. In Great Britain, the cause began to attract attention when the philosopher John Stuart Mill presented a petition in Parliament calling for the inclusion of women's suffrage in the Reform Act. Feminist writer and intellectual Mary Wollstonecraft was born on April 27, 1759 in London. When her friend Fanny died in 1785, Wollstonecraft took a position as governess for the Kingsborough family in Ireland. 3 years later, she returned to London and became a translator and an advisor to Joseph Johnson, a noted publisher of radical texts. When Johnson launched the Analytical Review in 1788, Mary became a regular contributor. Within 4 years, she published her most famous work, A Vindication of the Rights of Women, in 1792. The ideas in her book were truly revolutionary at the time and caused tremendous controversy. Wollstonecraft also wrote Maria, or The Wrongs of Women, which asserted that women had strong sexual desires and that it was degrading and immoral to pretend otherwise. Women fought for their rights to vote by protesting so they would be allowed to live life in an atmosphere of religious freedom, having a voice in the government you support with your taxes, and living free of lifelong enslavement by another person. These beliefs were about how life should and must be lived, once considered outlandish by many. But these beliefs were desired by many women until they finally decided it was enough and they decided to speak out on it. The fight for their rights was long and hard, but with a lot of women injured and also in custody, they came out on top when they got their rights. The first country to grant national level voting rights to women was the self-governing British colony of New Zealand, and they passed the electoral bill in September 1893, which gave women the right to vote. Other countries followed soon after New Zealand, like Sweden, Britain, Finland, and some U.S. states. The suffrage movement created higher expectations for women. By the early 20th century, women were able to attend college and to train for professions, although not in the same numbers as men. They began to enter male-dominated professions like law, medicine, clergy, and corporate. Since there was more educational opportunities for women, it led more and more women to sense their potential for meaningful professional careers. Also, women's salaries increased, but not to the amount that men received. However, this was still a huge success for women because it was such a step from what it had been before. By comparing the effects of the women's suffrage movement to the effects of the women's rights movement, we can infer that the economic and social effects were similar. However, the political effects were different. Economically and socially, both movements gained women and more rights privileges. The women's rights movement granted women more political rights like property rights, whereas the women's suffrage movement achieved the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. Even though both movements were generally striving for the same thing, there were many differences between them.